First of all, I must most cordially thank the organizers of this festival for inviting me here. Pauline and Swara, a personal thank you to you. And Nithiya, it's lovely I thought we would be sharing stage much more, but it's great to be together. It is a very special opportunity. Let me explain. Till about some 2 decades ago, we from the so-called developing world were not traveling abroad as frequently as we do now. The first one from my family to fly out was my elder brother, and I have memories of a grand and somewhat tearful send-off. Prayers for his well-being, garlands around his neck, flowers offered, and lamp lit to wish him well. Now, it is the most ordinary thing. There's unlikely to be a single middle-class home where someone is not working, studying, or married abroad. But abroad then, and still today, means usually the so-called developed world. We know so little about our own developing world, so much of which is geographically and in various other ways much closer to us. No surprise then that this is my first visit to Malaysia, or that my first visit to Bangladesh, physically even closer, is still a month away. I feel at home in London and Paris and value my growing body of friends there, but I do feel deprived that I do not know you, my own neighbors, when there's so much we share, especially of a troubled colonial past, and would only enrich each other in interaction. So you know why I'm so thrilled our conversation has begun, and may it go forward and further. Now to my talk. A talk, mind you, and no formal lecture. The organizers chose it for me, writing as wilderness and freedom. Immediately it sends my imagination spinning because it evokes endless things, and these two concepts, wilderness and freedom, are absolutely what no writer can resist. Wilderness is the wilderness within one's being, the wilderness in the big bad world outside, the wilderness residing in forests, the wilderness residing in human beings, the wilderness of my voice lost in its own maze and jungle, the wilderness of my voice echoing in the desert, in the woods, in the winds, to whoever I think I'm speaking to, you too possibly, going nowhere or somewhere else, as with Cassandra, or with those talking one way when the world is going another. It is fascinating what all wilderness evokes. Likewise, freedom, which I cannot do without. Yet, sometimes I know, and often I do not know, that I am fettered, and in that tension of freeing myself from fetters lies creativity. Creativity, another wild beast which shall not be tamed. It teams up with a fellow wild beast called imagination, and together they wreak havoc with my dictates or with the stern, threatening warnings from the powers that be, and go their own way. As a writer, I'm delighted. As a citizen, not always. Wilderness and freedom have been of perennial importance, but in the world we inhabit today, they have become so all the more. It is a world that is bringing itself increasingly to the brink of self-annihilation. These two concerns of freedom and wilderness today impact not only writers and artists, but every member of the society. We just cannot ignore that. At the outset, let me highlight a larger existential question contained here. For in the rest of my talk, I shall be concerned with seemingly less weighty aspects of the question. Wilderness is usually seen as the antithesis of civilization. One of the abiding and most celebrated themes of human history over the millennia has been the progressive subjugation of the wild within us humans and out in the world that we inhabit. And thereby hangs and grows long the tale, spelt T-A-L-E, also suitably spelled T-A-I-L. Think of the colonials out to civilize us wild creatures of the East or in Africa, or in the truest civilized jungles ever. Think of progress with a capital P out to tame and civilize wild nature, unmindful of which dooming wilderness it is thereby descending us into. But do we face this? I doubt it. In our saner moments of oppressive fear, like when death visibly stalked us during the COVID-19 pandemic, we accept the hold of the wild upon us. But our larger narrative of human progress remains in place. The narrative of human progress as an unending process of taming the wild is not dislodged by its supreme irony. A word about that irony. Humans are the only species who have turned the wild instinct of aggression into violence and made it part of their nature. To indulge their violence and the kindred instincts of greed, domination, expansion, they have invented instruments of inconceivable mass destruction. The story is well known, but how much we keep it buried in the depths of our consciousness. Keep it buried despite our individual and collective lives, our entire world being replete with everyday tragic reminders of it. Clinging to our faith in our pathetic civilization and priding in its undiminishing capacity for progress. Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened. Chernobyl happens. Fukushima too, and others, and we are horrified, but sure, we will win the next round. Let me carry on my ruminations. A defining feature of humans is their proclivity for good as much as for evil. This paradox is neatly stated in the short write-up prepared for this festival. Our world, the write-up warns us, is now poised between civilization and barbarism. The word now in the warning suggests that this perilous balance between civilization and barbarism is a recent development. I wonder, if that was so, the danger to human civilization would not be as dire as it actually is. It is this dire because the balance between civilization and barbarism seems built into human nature. To illustrate this fundamental truth, let me refer briefly to its prescient elaboration in the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata. Focusing on a famed ruling dynasty, the tale moves ever so slowly but inexorably towards a fierce fratricidal war between two branches of a family. The war ends in total destruction for the good side and the bad. There are no victors and no vanquished. Even the best minds of the age participate in the war, knowing all the while it is doomed. The best, the noblest, and the wisest justify the very evil they could have averted. The Mahabharata ends with its putative author Vyas crying out in bafflement, "To the wilderness, with upraised arms I shout, but no one listens. When virtually everything one aspires for in life can be obtained by following dharma, why should anyone fail to follow dharma?" Incidentally, dharma, often used to connote religion, here means good conduct, a decent way of life. The Mahabharata is a cautionary tale about the inexhaustible human capacity for brutality and violence. Centuries of subsequent human history have only corroborated this. No less baffled than Vyas was in his day, we today are obliged to ask, when civilization can give everything we aspire for, why can't we dispose of barbarism? Think of writers caught in this world of barbarism, masquerading as civilization, and decency lost in the folds of its cunning philosophy, wrapped in poverty and inequality. Writing in any case takes you into a wilderness. However well known, it opens a new unknown that you have to find your way through. It may be the jungles inside or outside. It may be innovating or despairing. But wilderness requires navigation, and that is a given for a writer. Not all writers may have the same acute sense of the wilderness. In fact, some writers don't have it at all. But I shall, for stylistic felicity, speak of wilderness as if applied to writers as a collective. I find myself thinking of me and my own forays. My novels willy-nilly confront the barbarism within and without, sometimes directly, but always also obliquely. If you live in it, how can you not write it? Or, put another way, barbarism is under your skin and above it too, so there's no getting away, is there? I will here outline some of my works to say it clearer. One of my novels, Hamara Sheher Us Baras, Our Town That Year, confronts the danger directly. The novel's town is not just one town, nor is its year just that year. It speaks of a wider, ever-spreading fire. It focuses on the drama of riots and animosity in my country between its two major communities, the Hindus and the Muslims, and the changing mental landscape where even the so-called educated and enlightened begin to speak a language of revenge and hate. As a character in the novel puts it, where, tell me please, are the riots being fought? It is where blood is flowing, and that, may I inform you, is flowing right here under our skin too. The novel deals with the surge of poison and prejudice sputtering out from within even enlightened souls. What to say of the overtly, openly hostile beings? An educated Hindu, for instance, says they, the Muslims, go for halal and so get used to enjoying watching slow death and therefore go happily on killing sprees. Another Hindu, despairingly speaking into the wilderness, of this hidden wilderness now surfacing, counters, what of doctors, so habituated to dealing in death and bloodshed? It must make them the best murderers ever. We thought we had thrashed out all there was to know about differences and amities between the two communities, living together for centuries, fighting and loving each other. But no, there are dark, wild interiors, fed by new forces that are confounding us. This has led to another wilderness, which threatens to overwhelm us and kill us. We must devise a way to stop that. But to do so, we must first understand this wilderness. It is urgent, but there is no time, because we are blinded by the whipping storm. My narrator devises a way. Record all you see, smell, hear, whatever, even if you don't know what it means. For there may be a later moment when someone will have the respite to see your record and may find the way out of this wilderness. So, she, he, it, the narrator, begins copying down whatever is around, without understanding sometimes, copying the inane along with the intense, and it emerges like a disjointed collage, or like bits and pieces of a world torn asunder by an explosion and strewn all over. The explosion is even more itself in another novel, Khali Jagah, The Empty Space. It is a bomb explosion in a university cafe, which was considered a safe place till now, indicating the routinization of terrorist violence in our world and what it does to ordinary beings who nurtured only the ordinary human desire to have a carefree life of decency and the usual kinds of happiness. The cafe is destroyed and only one tiny space the size of a 3-year-old is miraculously untouched. The mother of the 18-year-old who disappeared in the blast adopts the 3-year-old who now leads the life of the 18-year-old too, and put another way, leads neither his own life nor of the dear departed. He is the survivor telling the tale, searching a way through the maze inside him and outside. Then, of course, there is Ret Samadhi, tomb of sand, an elegy for our time, a laughing elegy I called it, hoping for a happily wild, polyphonic, pluralistic, diversity-rich world in the face of a growing drive towards monoculturalism and the attendant authoritarian impulse which comes with it, seeking to create hegemony and inequalities, disuniting living beings. It brings to the fore the senseless destruction unleashed by the borders and boundaries of religions, cultures, countries, genders, etc., into which we have divided ourselves. The same timeless question bounces up. When civilization can give everything we aspire for, why can't we do without barbarism? Talking of writers and writing, I'm tempted to dilate a little on a wilderness that writers actually cherish. The venturing forth into unfamiliar terrain and discovering, enjoying, navigating its ups and downs and slippages and chasms. Searching always for a way forward, further and bolder, without losing your balance and toppling ignominiously. This is the case even when one goes into what is apparently a known and trodden before path. Reminds me of a story about Vivekananda, a great spiritual leader of modern India. Vivekananda was a disciple of a mystic named Ramakrishna Paramhans. One day, Ramakrishna held Vivekananda in a tight embrace, and Vivekananda felt that a light had entered his body. Then, releasing him from the embrace, the master said, "I have passed on to you all that I possessed. I am a pauper now." Soon after, the master died, and his disciples accepted Vivekananda as their leader. One day, Vivekananda called his fellow disciples and announced that he was going out on his own spiritual search. Surprised, they reminded him that the master had passed on everything to him and that he did not need any such search. Vivekananda replied, "Would the master have become what he was without his own spiritual search?" Even if apocryphal, this story tells us a profound truth. You have to be a seeker yourself. Guidance from the best can take you far, but you yourself have to dive deep to sink and swim on your own. Once that seeking begins, things familiar look different. Hitherto invisible phenomena begin to be seen, and old modes of perception give way to new ones. Old certainties collapse. Doubts, seemingly devoid of resolution, arise. So do questions that seem to admit of no answers. You find yourself alone in the midst of a vast wilderness. I cannot think of a better example than Kafka. The nightmarish wilderness portrayed in his fiction is a true description of the world that he, along with his contemporaries, inhabited. But his contemporaries did not see the same world as Kafka did. In fact, even for years after he was dead, the truth of his portrayal was missed by many. Today, we have little difficulty in comprehending that truth. If anything, the world today has become more terrifying, more Kafkaesque than it was in Kafka's time. Yet, we do not seem to be oppressed by our world like Kafka was by his world, because we know how to put on blinkers. To the extent the world we write about is Kafkaesque, it is a wilderness. But there is another sense, the sense of the unknown and pathless region in which anything a writer takes up for writing is necessarily a wilderness. What writers usually choose to write about belongs to our familiar workaday world, but they are driven to write about it because they feel it to be different from what it appears to be. Freshly explored, the same old familiar thing becomes unusual. Forgive me, but again I'm reminded of a novel of mine, and I cannot refrain from sharing some thoughts about it with you. My first novel, My Mother. Narrating the story of 3 generations living together in a joint family, it sets out on a journey to particularly follow the women. It opens with a scene describing the main protagonist, Mai, whose pain and illness have been diagnosed to be caused by the withering away cartilage joining the vertebrae. We already knew, declared her children narrators, that mother had a weak spine, and that is the metaphor they defined her by. Mother with a weak spine, always bending over to carry out jobs at the bidding of others. But further into the journey set off by the weak spine, the narrator discovers that the way and the world are not what she thought they were, and finds another Mai as she forks her path through the wilderness, a Mai who, by her quiet guidance and invisible support and occasionally active intervention, is the one rescuing them from paternal and patriarchal control, rather than they rescuing this bent-over, subordinate, weak-spined mother. The act of writing, I dare say, is an exploration in the wilderness. Most writers work without a preset design, but even those who have a design are surprised off the beaten path. As the great maestro Ali Akbar says, "At first I play the sarod, and then it plays me." In Ret Samadhi, an ordinary image of an elderly woman imprinted itself casually in me and then would not leave me. And as we spent time together, something stirred up curiosity in me. Is she lying face almost buried into the wall and back to the family because she has rejected the world out of a sense of it is all over with life and nothing remains but to die? Or is she burrowing a hole into the wall to come out on the other side and re-emerge, reinvent, rejuvenate a life for herself? Thereafter, it was a creative wilderness where the woman indeed rose up and took to bridging one border after another, with me in tow. So flows wilderness, for writers like me at any rate, impelling us to cut our way through it almost serendipitously, to unlayer the dark, menacing wildernesses as much as the ebullient ones that make you soar. In either case, reaching out, hands upraised, in search for the real note, what in music is called the anhad nad, the ultimate note, the ultimate elusive truth. Serendipity, I said. That is an important ingredient in creativity, in life. Contrary to our arrogant belief that we know what we know and that is all, much lies in the subterranean reaches of our being. Just as a creative work is made up of so many elements coming together, we as humans are made up by a vast horde of things too. Our memories, others' memories, history, geography, maybe chance, and much else I'm not stopping to list here. All this goes into an intuition we nurture and hone inside us, and it is that which is as much a guide in our creative endeavors, perhaps more than our conscious self. To let that intuition play out its best tricks, we need freedom. And that is the pertinent point. The freedom to dilly-dally, play, risk, discover, uncover. Freedom is not a luxury, but a simple necessity for human understanding, dialogue, inventiveness. Freedom is what leads to doubts, which to questions, which to attempted answers and inventions, which to more doubts, questions, sort of answers, and on and on. Freedom is what we need the most for a free and civil existence. Freedom is what is exposed to the most serious and sustained threat from the powers that be. We are living in very troubled and increasingly authoritarian times. Surely the world was never an untroubled place. Pain, grief, distress, suffering, anyway, are the fountainhead of literature. But the trouble that threatens literature today is very different. It comes from an authoritarianism that is fast effacing the separation between the personal and the political, the home and the world, with a view to destroying dissent and imposing conformism. Authoritarianism is on the prowl everywhere, turning the world into a scared new place. Even societies that believe themselves to be immune to the looming threat are exposed to it. We are all too familiar with the ways in which authoritarianism everywhere is seeking to entrench itself. Coercive use of institutions and instruments of the state apart, it seeks to so control education and every possible means of communication as to indoctrinate people and manipulate their thoughts and feelings. Rapidly ceasing to be the means of free exchange and generation of ideas, a lot of the media echoes the powers that be. Social media is replete with prejudices and uses rumor to set off waves of intolerance. Moral policing as a sequel is gaining ground. There are instances of powerful, respectable publishers jettisoning works of profound importance. They are inserting in their contracts clauses requiring authors to undertake that their work contains nothing seditious, nor anything likely to hurt people's sentiments and thereby disturb public peace. Dialogue as a way of expressing disagreement is too easily replaced by violence and punishment, often countenanced by the state. The threat to freedom then comes from not only from the state with its multiple instruments of control, it also comes from within the society itself. This too is not a new development. Every society has its ways of ensuring a degree of conformance from its members. It has its prescriptions and proscriptions, even mechanisms to censor. A society's disciplining of its members may not be punitive and coercive like that of the state. Nonetheless, it can hurt and so be effective. The word is variously endangered at various points. The need to protect the writer's freedom from the state, the market, and the society is admitted by all. But that freedom is generally construed in a constricted sense. It is assumed that writers would, on their own, suitably tailor their freedom to the demands of morality and social good. That their literature would have at least a modicum of social concern. Not only most advocates of writers' freedom, but many writers themselves and their organizations share this view. This is particularly true of people and organizations with strong ideological predilections. This is a view that more or less prevails the world over, but it is particularly entrenched in the erstwhile colonized world. Long years of foreign domination, and as a sequel, the movements for national regeneration and independence produced a collective consciousness that privileged patriotism above everything else. Generation after generation of writers happily made literature an instrument of national service. It may, in some circles, be less explicit and more nuanced now, but that consciousness continues. When I started writing in the 80s of the last century, literature was marked by a purpose-filled literary responsibility to society and not to itself. Now, if literature must be an instrument for social regeneration, national awakening, and political assertion, and if it is the writer's responsibility to inform, reform society, pure storytelling must not be the writer's primary concern. Further, if the regime has its big brother is watching ways, the writer has to watch out. What's going on out there in society is so overpowering and overcrowding that it intrudes everywhere, and the private and the public and the home and the world are difficult to keep apart. It may be an exciting place where everything is a simmering story, but we are expected to feel obliged to tell these pressing stories urgently, and that makes it an oppressive place also. With new wrongs being perpetrated every day, we are also expected to feel obliged to come out and register our protest. But the writer wishes to be left alone to do what she can do best in her way. Do I want, as a condition to the troubled historical moment and legacy I am born into, a compulsory membership into a protest movement? I am disturbed by this lack of distance between the truth and me. Restless for the solitude I am not getting. Cursed that I cannot be anything apart from my society. Desirous of a free realm of imagination, freed of this overpowering societal impingement. Yes, I crave freedom, irresponsibility, and adventure. I crave a creativity that accords language, sound, shape, and story equal respect. The fun of literature, its own truth, its auto-referentiality. Not court cases to be fought out here to give the message of right and wrong. Rather, to let the serendipitous layers speak, to laugh, to search, to discover, without fear, in good faith and hope, free from external prescriptions, proscriptions, and censors. I want to discharge my responsibility to be irresponsible and adventurous and venture into the hidden and the unknown to discover new things, unexpected things, hidden away things. To laugh and be playful. Never disrespectful, but often irreverent. A panel in a temple in India depicts a god pissing, and the stream is falling straight into a prayer fire lit by a fellow god. But there is love and laughter and jollity between them, no disregard or disrespect. Where is the room for such irresponsibility, irreverence, and play in our troubled times? The writer in me worries. Where is the writer's privilege and right to be in the studio without the world pressuring her to come out on the street and hold aloft banners and give public statements? The writer in me wonders. The writer in me looks for ways to evade the ghost looking down her shoulder and dictating what to write and what to not touch. I constantly navigate my way through this maze. That is all I'm doing, succumbing to the urgency of the world and turning back to the aesthetics and freedom of a literary time and space away from the din. My nerves are sometimes frayed by this tug of war, but I carry on, confused but creative. One last word. Many may be inclined to dismiss as anarchic and senseless my plea for this kind of freedom. They may even see in it a gratuitous invitation to a dangerous wilderness. A great deal can be said to show how necessary the exercise of such freedom is. Necessary, no doubt, for the writer, but even more necessary for the society. Let me bring in here India's Nobel laureate in literature, Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore, a great writer, was also an ardent patriot, humanist, and today's parlance, a public intellectual. He lived in an age when nationalism was the one force that gave the world's colonized peoples the hope of a better and free future. It made possible the various freedom struggles that brought the imperial powers to heel. In that age, and continuing to resist imperialism, Tagore had the prescience to see the dangers of nationalism. He also had the courage to mount a powerful critique of nationalism and articulate it in a series of lectures in different countries of the world. A great admirer and friend of Gandhi, Tagore sensed danger in Gandhi's mode of mobilizing the masses for the Indian freedom struggle and said so publicly. He did this in his essays and lectures and also in his fiction. Today, the whole world knows to its cost that Tagore was right. Nationalism and identity are at the root of much of the crises today. When he wrote and said this, he was exercising precisely the kind of freedom that I, like many other writers, wish to have. Writers were, perhaps, never permitted this ideal freedom. Nonetheless, they managed to exercise it with their creativity, courage, and cunning. The writer is always seeking strategies to say as she will, sometimes in a more supportive climate, sometimes in a risky one. Writers are never going to have that freedom in today's troubled authoritarian times, but they are unlikely to forsake it even in these times. And on that brave but sincere note, I would like to read out from Ret Samadhi, the original text, translated as Tomb of Sand, exercising my freedom to be in my mother tongue. Mother tongue, perhaps denoting yet another tale of wilderness, tale again spelled in both spellings. Thank you. But I'll take, now please, I'll just take another few minutes, 5 or 6 minutes or less, and I insist on reading out in Hindi. बिलाल खास आपसे मुखातिब. The main protagonist in this scene has crossed into Pakistan from India, crossed the border, and is caught in an area, under arrest in an area where she and her daughter are without a visa, and they are being interrogated. And as it turns out, this main protagonist has a past, and she had come from that part of the world and gone to India, or forced to go to India during the partition. So it's that scene. Interrogation. आपका नाम अली अनवर पूछ रहे हैं माँ से. लो, तुम्हें ये नहीं बताया गया कि किससे मिलने जा रहे हो? माँ पूछती है. अली अनवर नीचे मेज़ को देखते हैं, फिर ऊपर, मगर कभी माँ के बाएं, कभी दाएं. आप यहाँ कैसे आ गई? तुम्हारी इस फौज, माँ हाथ सबकी तरफ घुमाती है जैसे झाड़ू फेरती हो, ने ये भी नहीं बताया. हाथ से अभी भी मिट्टी निकल रही है. अली अनवर बहुत शाइस्तगी से बोलते हैं. ख़वातीन, आपने बहुत गलत किया है. बाहर ख़तरा है, आपको इल्म नहीं. फिर तो शुक्र कि तुम्हारे लोग हमें यहाँ ले आए. माँ मुस्कुराती है. सही कह रही हैं खातून, आप यहाँ महफूज हैं. बाहर पता भी नहीं चलता कि कोई गायब है. तालिबान के हाथों में पड़ गया कि इन्हीं घाटियों में कहीं दफन हो गया. हम चाहते हैं आपको सही सलामत वापस भेज दें. वापस ही आई हूँ. माँ उसकी आँख में आँख डालती हैं. अली अनवर आँखें और नीची कर लेते हैं. मोहतरमा, आप जानती हैं आप बिना वीज़ा के हैं. वीज़ा मेरे लिए क्या, आज तक नहीं माना, अब इस उम्र पे मानूंगी. माँ कहती हैं जैसे 100 बरस की हैं कि 200 की, कि सदियों से सदियों तक. आप जानती हैं ये जुर्म है. आप सरहद पार करके आई हैं. अली अनवर की आवाज़ सूत भर ऊंची. बेटी एक कदम माँ की तरफ लेती है और 3 कदम पीछे हो जाती है. कौवा जहाँ था वहीं रुक जाता है. गर्दन तिरछी करके कुछ इस अदा से बुत बना है कि एक पंख गौर से सुनने के लिए गाल पर रख लिया हो और अपलक सुन रहा हो, क्योंकि माँ छड़ी मिट्टी में टिका के उठने लगी हैं, उठती जाती हैं खड़ी होने को, उसके बाद भी उठती जाती हैं, जैसे छोटी नहीं लंबी होती जाएं खैबर के आसमान से सिर सटाती। और अब वो ऊंची खड़ी हैं और सब आँख ऊपर किए एक हाथ गाल पर दिए सुन रहे हैं। सरहद, माँ कहती हैं, सरहद, जानते हो सरहद क्या होती है? बॉर्डर। क्या होता है बॉर्डर? वजूद का घेरा होता है, किसी शख्सियत की टेक होता है, कितनी ही बड़ी कितनी ही छोटी। रुमाल की किनारी, मेज़पोश का बॉर्डर, मेरी दोहर को समेटती कढ़ाई, आसमान की सरहद, इस बगिया की क्यारी, खेतों की मेड़, इस छत की मुंडेर, तस्वीर का फ्रेम। सरहद तो हर चीज़ की है। अरे लेकिन सरहद निकालने के लिए नहीं होती, दोनों तरफ को और उजालने के लिए होती है। तुमने मुझे निकाल दिया, मैं निकल जाऊं? नहीं, सरहद बंद नहीं करती, खोलती है, आकार बनाती है, किनारा सजाती है। बॉर्डर पहचान बढ़ाता है, जहाँ दो तरफ मिलते हैं और दोनों तरफ खिलते हैं, बॉर्डर उनके मिलने को सजाता है। हर अंग की सरहद होती है, इस दिल की भी। उसको घेरे मगर उसको बाहर के अंगों से पुल की तरह जोड़े, न कि तोड़ने, दिल के भीतर और दिल के बाहर। मनहूसों, दिल के बीच में सरहद खींच दोगे तो उसे बॉर्डर नहीं कहते, चोट कहते हैं। दिल की सरहद में दिल लॉक कर दोगे तो दिल टूट जाएगा। गधों, सरहद कुछ नहीं रोकती, दो अंगों के बीच का पुल होती है, रात और दिन के बीच, जिंदगी मौत के, पाने खोने के। वो जुड़े हैं, उन्हें अलग नहीं कर सकते। सरहद क्षितिज, जहाँ दो लोक मिलते हैं, गलबहियाँ करते हैं। बॉर्डर इश्क है, इश्क जेल नहीं बनाता, हर रोक लांघने के लिए सितारे बिछाता है। बॉर्डर मिलन की रेखा है, इधर और उधर के जोड़ को अगल बगल लाकर खुशनुमा बनाने को। दोनों की मुलक के लिए होता है, दोनों की मुलाकात के लिए होता है। संगम। सरहद भले मानस पार करने की चीज़ है, बॉर्डर माने कूदो, है ही कि लांघो, लौटो, खेलो, मुस्कुरा के स्वागत करो, वहाँ मिलो, रचो। मज़ा है उसे लांघने में, सारा लेन देन वहीं होता है। सरहद अपने को दर्शाती है दूसरे से राब्ता करने, एक है तो दूसरा है मोहब्बत में। नफ़रत में हो गए तो जो खून ताकत पहुँचाने इधर से उधर धमनियों से जाता है, वो छिटक जाएगा और बहेगा, दोनों अंग तिल तिल मरेंगे। ये कौन बेवकूफ़ चाहेगा? ये तुम बेवकूफ़ चाहते हो। तुमने सरहद को नफ़रत का बाइस बना दिया। दो वजूदों में मज़ीद निखार लाता खूबसूरत बॉर्डर नहीं, दोनों को मारता, रक्त नली को काटता हैवान। नादानों, ये सिर्फ तुम जैसी कच्ची बुद्धियां ही गुमान कर सकती हैं कि तुमको मारूंगा मुझे कुछ नहीं होगा। बच्चों, खून से चलते बॉर्डर्स का एक ही हश्र मुमकिन है। खून नलियों को फाड़ के बहेगा और सारे अंग सूख के अकड़ जाएंगे, और फिर करते रहना अल्लाह अकबर और हरे रामा हरे कृष्णा। है कहाँ सरहद? मियाँ, एक पेड़ पर पिछवाने झंडा फहरा दिया, सरहद बन गई। जोगिंदर पाल के दीवाने मौलवी साहब तो कराची पहुंच गए, पर उनके लिए सरहद नहीं बनी। वो मानते रहे कि वो अपने उसी पुराने लखनऊ में आबाद हैं। तुमने अपने मन में सरहद बना दी, नाम बदल दिए, जगह तो वही रही, लोग वही रहे। अहमक ना बनो, जो कहती हूँ करो। कंटीले बॉर्डर के बीच से हवा की तरह बहो, बिजली हो जाओ अगर बिजली के तार हैं। खेलो अच्छे खेल, अच्छे होकर। अच्छे को रोकोगे तो बुरे को हथियाते कब देर लगी है। तुमने डर का खेल बना दिया है, कुत्तों की लड़ाई बना दी है। भौं भौं, ये मेरा इलाका, मूत के बॉर्डर बना दिया। अब जो आया तो भौं भौं कच्चा चबा जाऊंगा। सरहद लालचियों के हवाले ना करो, उनके लिए खून और जुल्म मुफ्त, और धूप आसमान हवा तस्करी। मत मानो बॉर्डर को, बॉर्डर से अपने टुकड़े मत करो। हम ही हैं, हम नहीं मानेंगे तो ये दीवार नहीं रहेगी। माँ ने छड़ी से एक लाइन बना दी, उसके आर पार होने लगी, कभी कूदती कभी झूलती, हाथ और पाँव फेंक के खेलती, मिट्टी धमकती। उसकी आवाज़ ऊपर जाती नीचे आती, उसकी आंखें कभी सुलगती कभी हंसती, और कभी लाइन पर खड़ी वो गोल गोल घूमने लगती, छड़ी उठा के सबके सिरों पर धीरे धीरे नचाती कि उन्हें ही दाएं बाएं होना पड़ता। 9 रस छिटकते हैं, सब खड़े हो गए हैं रंग बिरंगे होकर। अली अनवर का मुंह लाल, दढ़ियलों का पीला, खूनियों का हक्का बक्का, नवाज भाई का मोमिल, बेटी का भयभीत, कौवे का गर्वीला, किसी के मुंह से न पी न चूं। माँ चुप हो जाती है, धीरे धीरे बैठने लगती है, जैसे अपने में गहरी उतरती जाती, बैठने के बाद भी उतरती जाती है, जैसे मिट्टी में दब जाने। जाओ, वो सिर फेर लेती है, मेरा मन उदास है, बहुत लोग मर गए हैं। शुक्रिया।
Thank you so much, Geetanjali. That was a poignant and very moving lecture, extremely powerful, but also very, very personal. So what I'll do is I'll just ask, 1 or 2 questions before opening it up to the floor, because I'm sure people are just itching to ask questions after such a wide-ranging and also very deep lecture. The one thing that struck me as I was hearing you speak is, going back to the theme of GTLF in terms of taming the wild, there are these big concepts, you bring up things like civilization and barbarism. And you seem to say that in the world we're living in today, they're not actually very different from each other. That civilization is in fact barbarism, perhaps garbed with, the fig leaf of political theory and maybe recent history, but it's not very different. And you seem to thrill or to be very protective of your inner wilderness from having this kind of barbaric outer world from pushing in on it. You seem to almost argue, why must I be trapped by my temporal situation as a writer? My freedom to play, my freedom to be, my freedom to imagine should be limitless, and I must not be contained. But at the same time, you've just read a portion from your book where the inner wilderness of one of your protagonists has in fact has a transformative effect on how we're seeing this outer barbarism. And I just sense a somewhat of an interesting tension there. You're pushing out against this barbaric world that wants to push in, but the assertion of your wilderness almost also has a transformative capacity for the outer world. You don't intend to be a soldier for your temporal trappings or to change the world, but you might just become one.
But I think yes, in the way you have, I don't see it framed as a question, but whatever curiosity you have raised, you've actually yourself answered very well. So I can only add to it, but I think I'm talking precisely of this tension between the different kinds of wildernesses and the desire to get away from the pretend civilization which is actually so barbaric, the desire to get away from the dictates of that and from the control of that, and the inability also to get away, but also the necessity to engage with it, and in the process being on that, in that border area where creativity is at work, and finding my strategies to break free and not. So it's doing both the things constantly. That's what I would say. But the other thing I would like to say, as a general statement, I'd like to say there's a great line, there's a favorite line of mine from some text. In Hindi, in Urdu, in Hindustani, it is, जो कर्रे जवाब बर वक्त नहीं सूझते अब सूझ रहे हैं. So my thing is that you ask me the questions, I'll give the best answers a week later. But, yes.
I guess one small follow-up question is, so there's the inner wilderness and the power of the inner wilderness, but you also say it requires navigation. What is your compass as a writer to navigate your inner wilderness?
I really don't know. I don't know what my compass would be. I think it is to some extent a foray into the unknown. So it's a willingness to some extent to get lost, so not have a compass. But even as I say that, I know that what I called intuition, that there is something guiding me, some aesthetic sense, some growing sensitivity to the world inside and the world outside. I think all that would be guiding me and perhaps will save me, but will also give me the courage to venture into rougher and more unknown seas. So I won't speak of a very clear compass at work. What I'll also say is that creativity is actually such an intimate act, and sometimes it can have its own kind of violence. It's really almost like pulling out your entrails and being willing to, you pull out your entrails at that point, just in all honesty, to confront yourself or the world, but at some point that is going to become visible to the others. So in a way, you're putting yourself on the experiment table and letting the world see your entrails, and that can sort of evoke all kinds of responses. So there again a certain freedom is required, and I think it's very important for society to let that happen, because what they're going to see is such an important barometer, thermometer, and everything of life and the world and eternity. So I think that is where the craving for freedom is all important.
Thank you so much, Geetanjali. I am also an Indian writer, but I'm a diasporic Indian writer. My name is Deepika Mukherjee. And I also have roots in Malaysia, but I live in Chicago right now. So, aapko bahut bahut swagat hai Malaysia mein. And thank you so much for this wonderful talk. My question, I have so many, and you speak so much to my heart, because I think what I'm noticing in India over the past, I'm going to name the person who must not be named and you did not name. It's basically Modi and his Hindutva reign, and the mobster, the Gunda Raj, really. And I think there has definitely been an increase in the mob violence of somebody like one single man like Batra being able to shut down someone like Wendy Doniger, which was not there in the past. So my question, without meandering too much, is I know that your Agra talk was cancelled because of these kinds of concerns, but for those of us who are writing about India, and I have tremendous respect for those of you who are doing it from the inside. And this also, appeals to like the Malaysian population who are trying to write about change from the inside. How are you doing it in the face of renewed, violence and renewed sort of backlash to whatever you want to say?
Lots of things to respond to out there. One thing I do want to say, this is not in defense of Mr. Modi or any such power, but I do not think the story is only about Modi. I think there is something happening in the world today, in some places more brazen than in others, but there is something everywhere where the powers and the forces it unleashes in society are creating an atmosphere which can instill fear. So I do want to say that, because too easily India gets singled out as the place, or Saudi Arabia gets singled out as the place, but no. Let's not fool ourselves. It's happening in different ways everywhere. How do we carry on? We carry on because I think writing is for a writer like breathing. You have to breathe. You have to do what you are doing. You have to find strategies of doing it. And see, there are things involved about what you may write and what you may not write. There are all kinds of sensitivities, certainly, which come into play. As women, we know, when we have these very macho writers continuing to depict women in certain ways, very good male writers quite often, but their gaze continues to be the same. We have objections, we have problems. What we don't do and what we are speaking up against is deciding that you can declare a fatwa to kill such a person, or go yourself and stab the writer, or get the writer arrested. We are opposed to that. Otherwise, there are lots of things. There will be mistakes, there will be unintended insensitivities, which we'll have to blunder through and learn. And we have to be allowed to do that. That is what dialogue is all about. So I think what we are lamenting is the atmosphere of dialogue becoming so constrained and suffocating. Not the other thing, of course, but when it comes to the kind of very open, brazen censorship control you're talking about, I think in some senses there's nothing you can do. Because if you try and suit, there's no way you could know what to write which will suit them. Now, in my case, the incident you referred to is not really about any objection in my book. It's suddenly a writer getting prominence because of the booker, suddenly a book, suddenly being in the public space, and probably searching, what can I find here to oppose. So if that is the kind of intention, an extra literary intention, then you never know what's going to be found where. Something will be found everywhere. So either if you're going to allow that to scare you it might, but you have to carry on, even as you are scared. But if you allow it to control you or try and guide you, then you might as well stop writing, because you will never know what you should be writing to please or not get into this kind of trouble. Otherwise, it's just about being being sensitive. I think writers and all citizens have to be sensitive. We have to be sensitive to, we talk about racist things. We talk about color sometimes unintentionally and hurt somebody, but all that has to be resolved by dialogue. That's the main thing. Roundabout answer, that's it.
Yeah, hi, morning. Thank you for your time today. I have two general questions. First of all is that if you were to write Tomb of Sand all over again, what would you change and what would you maintain? And the second question is that what was your greatest challenge in writing the book, and then how did you overcome it? Thanks.
I don't think I would write it again. And if I write it again, it will become another book, and I'll let it become another book. No, I don't think there's anything there which I'm sort of worried I've done or unhappy I've done and would like to change. It's a process. It's at least I'm not the kind of writer who thinks, oh, here's a gem and it could not have been better. I'm not like that. So, of course, there is always, I wish things are better. I wish I wrote better than I did. But the process is such that I wouldn't interfere in what I've already done. I mean, I have discovered certain things, I've probably achieved some decent things there, and perhaps not so good somewhere, but it's part of the process, and I'm happy to do it like that. Second question, sorry, I forgot. Greatest challenge.
And how did you overcome it?
See, again, it's not a question I'm asking of myself when I'm writing what is the greatest challenge. It just took me a very long time, this book. It took me 8 or 9 years to write. And I finished it. There was a point, perhaps 2 or 3 years before I gave it for publication. I had finished the book, and there was something which was still stopping me from giving it to the publisher. And my publisher could not understand. He said, you say you finished it, then why don't you give it to me? And I didn't know myself what it was I was waiting for. But some voice which would say, this is it, this process is over, and now the book has to go. So I kept tinkering with it, and those 2 or 3 years were quite burdensome, I would say, which has not happened with my earlier works. Because I even began to worry that I've finished this book, but I'll never consider it finished and I'll never give it to the press. So I don't know what it was, why that inner voice was not coming, which said, now it's done, let it go. But other than that, I don't think there was any conscious, deliberate sort of worry I had, which I was trying to overcome. Yeah. Not necessary. You can read the book instead.
Thank you. I have read the book and it's brilliant, and Daisy Rockwell's translation is brilliant. So you mentioned how Ali Akbar says he plays the sarod and then the sarod plays him. So in terms of writing the book, what was your biggest surprise as you wrote on?
The biggest surprise was this woman who looked like she was ready to die, and she looked like she had given up. And the biggest surprise was that she had not, and she actually just rose up and started overturning everything. I mean, she forgot her age and became like the younger one. She forgot the rules of society and started sort of doing that. And basically, there was no border anymore for her. And she was ready to do anything she wanted to, and she just kept leaping across borders. And there I was behind her, also learning to leap. That's it.
Geetanjali, thank you so much.
Thank you.